This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension of lunch, we are in standing finance committee. We shall revert to such.
Standing Finance Committee resumes. Continue with Head 31, Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology. We continue with questioning or comment from the Honorable Member of the Opposition, Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Probably just a couple of further questions at this point. I wanted to find out from the Minister and her team as to the level of concern that may exist with them with reference to matters of security and privacy of information. If we are expanding the digital platform, creating significantly more so a digital economy, with all that's happening in the world, with threat to cybersecurity and all of that, what is the level of concern that exists with the ministry? I would like to hear them perhaps speak to that, and what plans may be afoot to counter that type of thing. The other question I had to ask, Madam Chair, is to the level of satisfaction with reference to the buy-in from the private sector, from private interests in Barbados, as we create a more technologically sound environment. What is the level of buy-in? We're going to be significantly impacting life in the marketplace in Barbados in several respects. And if the private sector is not sufficiently on board with this, then we're going to end up spinning top in mud sometimes, wasting resources. So I would like to know how satisfied they are with where we are, with where the private sector is today in terms of the buy-in to their vision. And the third question, the digital economy will significantly change the world of the market immediately around us and further afield around us, as has been expressed here today in the vision outline. It will empower people, individuals and businesses and institutions, and even the state machinery will be better empowered, but it also will expose us to greater vulnerabilities. Capital likes to dominate labor. Capital is in the business of profit making. The disposition of capital in Barbados, especially foreign investment capital, is to try to discourage organized labor from being organized. An expanding digital economy will change relationships, will expose the laboring class to some vulnerabilities. Is there a plan, is there some consideration being given to this in terms of how we may have to change the legislative architecture that provides certain social provisions, socioeconomic provisions for the working class? I hope I'm clear. All I'm in essence trying to say, the world in which capital and labor will relate to each other will change. Capital dominance now exploits labor to a large extent in Barbados. Foreign investment capital tends to discourage labor from organizing itself. As the digitization of the economy empowers people, it will also expose the working class to some new vulnerabilities. And we have to have in place some social protection platforms in the interests of the working class. I hope you understand me. I tend to confuse myself sometimes.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I'll take the questions in the order that you presented and perhaps invite some of my colleagues to chime in as well. On the matter of cybersecurity, you are absolutely right. From the time we start going online, it creates a different level of concern around cybersecurity. And I want to reassure this Honorable House and the people of Barbados that this ministry is taking cybersecurity quite seriously. You may recall that at the very outset, that was one of the areas that I indicated was going to be a priority for us. And you may recall also from last year, that was a priority for us, and we have made some significant steps in that regard. No country talks about its security because, as you know, in a significant way, because as you know, when you move to a digital environment, cybersecurity now is not just something that you relegate to technology. It becomes a national security issue. And therefore, we have elevated it to that level. And some of the work that we are doing in cybersecurity, and this is as much as I will say about it, is in collaboration with our Barbados Defense Force and other organizations that have responsibility for such. That's as much as I will say at this point in time. Because that just shows you the level of importance that we have placed on that. We also understand that we have to build the capacity and the competence that is within government and outside of government when it comes to detecting, protecting, and responding to those kinds of threats. We are currently in the process of building that capacity. We have identified the standards to which we would want our team to be trained and skilled, and we are diligently working with the necessary agencies to upskill our people and bring them to the levels of certification that will ensure that we have better capabilities within. Additionally, we believe that people, when it comes to cybersecurity, people are their best firewall. So as we start to increase public education, we need to help the citizens become the firewalls, where because they know better and they understand, they are able to better protect themselves and therefore protect anyone who will be a part of a network to which they belong. So I do want to reassure the Honorable Member, Madam Chair, that we are taking this seriously, and I have stated to the extent that I can some of the steps that we are taking to ensure that this matter receives the level of priority. And we have also dedicated some aspects of our budget to this, at least the estimates we are requesting to this matter. Second question was about buy-in from private interests impacting life in the marketplace, the fact that when we start to work in a more digital environment, it has these kinds of impacts. When we talk about private interests, you will notice that much of the work that this ministry is doing, including an honorable member mentioned the Smart Barbados and how we're building out that vision and all of the initiatives that arrive therefrom, is that we're doing it in collaboration. We're not seeking to do it alone, whether we are doing it with the private sector in some cases or with government or with the third sector or with the nonprofit communities, we recognize that it isn't just being buy-in, whereby you have this idea and you get people to buy in, but it's about people being invested from the beginning so that they're in on the ground floor as you're starting to think it up, think through it, work through it, and decide what it will take to do so. And so how do we feel? Do we believe that the private sector is ready? I think this is a journey we take together, and we meet each other where we are. And some are far more advanced than others. You're seeing some disruptive technologies now in the market. Cave Shepherd's Card is coming out there and doing some very interesting things in the payments market. You had M-Money that came out and started to do some other things. So you have a number of disruptive technologies right here, homegrown in Barbados, and if they're not homegrown, they're certainly active in this market, seeking to do some very interesting things. Barbados has got a fintech sandbox, one of the few in the world for the experimentation with financial technology. So I'm saying to you that, yes, you're absolutely right, not everyone seems to be gung-ho, but we have enough good examples that we can see that Barbados is making the effort and our private sector is beginning to step up to the table, and our ministry and our government in general is working collaboratively with others.
Honorable Member for St. Michael's South.
Madam Chair, with your leave, I didn't think I heard a response on the matter of
Third one, go ahead.
potentially social protection initiatives for the working class as we go forward, and the new threats that would come, or the new advantages, if there be, that would be created for capital over labor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am sure the minister that has responsibility for labor will have a very firm position on this, and I shall
But with all due,
let his remit be his remit.
with all due
However-
respects to the minister, Madam Chair, I couldn't get a word out of the minister.
However, one of the However, one of the wonderful things about the digital age is that as much as we may take it from the perspective that capital can take advantage of labor, what is also interesting is that as labor workers upskill themselves, reskill themselves, and future-proof their skills, they are now more marketable, which means they have power to move. They have power to move within, they have power to be able to sell their services elsewhere, and so I think that this industry, if we choose to see it that way, puts tremendous power in the hands of labor to be able to control the narrative.
So you're saying then that we need to think in terms of social protection mechanisms for capital as opposed to labor?
I'm not saying that, I'm saying there's mutual benefit, and if we could be open-minded, we will be able to see how all parties might be able to leverage this time to their advantage.
Thank you, ma'am, but I'm sure my older friend from St. Michael East will not be satisfied with that answer.
Thank you. Honorable Member for St. Michael's South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you very much, Minister, for your leadership in this new and exciting ministry. I have a question. You know, they say we're in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. I get nervous when people talk about these revolutions because I don't recall us benefiting so much from the first, the second, or the third. So, this being the age of the fourth industrial revolution, I just want to know, I mean, technology is changing every day. We're seeing now the Internet of Things, the shared economy, all kinds of advances in AI. And I know there are some young people, and not so young people, in Barbados who are now doing very creative things, very imaginative, I mean, wildly exciting things. And the Internet has, not the Internet, this new age has the capacity either to bridge the gap between those who have and those who don't, or to widen the gap between those who have and those who don't. And I just want to be sure that whatever we do, and so this is my question really, how do we ensure that given this age, that the average person could benefit from these new technological advances to the extent that it does not serve to perpetuate the divide between those who have and those who do not have, because technology could either be a gift for some or a curse. And I just want to make sure that I know I have very creative young people in my area doing some things, and I just want to make sure that if they come up with some ideas that they get to benefit from it, that Barbados as a country gets to benefit from it, and that some other country or person, as in keeping with these revolutions, would not swoop in and take the benefit of their hard work. So how do we protect our young people and the persons who you would consider to be the average person in this new age?
Madam Chair, if I may,
You may.
I'll answer very directly. by having a policy of inclusiveness is one of the things that this ministry has done. You will notice that all of the programs that this ministry have put out there, they're all income neutral, which means it's not for anyone from any particular economic bracket. You will notice, ma'am, that on the, well, you would not know this, but the Game Changers program, of which I mentioned earlier, there is a legal component that is included in that. And that is to ensure that the intellectual property is properly managed once the creativity comes out from that program. So we are building in the kinds of services, like legal services, into the kinds of programs that we're building, where there will be some kind of intellectual property that may be produced from them. Thirdly, we are managing a very closely structured process, as in through the tech accelerators and others, where it is not a loose arrangement, but the parties that engage, they engage under certain understanding. And so it is about built-in protection from start, as opposed to doing it as an afterthought after something has been produced. In addition, Madam Chair, number of the programs, I'll give you an example. I am talking about the divide. We, Barbados, this government, supported the Caribbean Girls Hackathon. The Prime Minister herself, in fact, was at the event which was held at LESC, where the program was judged, where there was judging. Girls are a cohort that will oftentimes be excluded, particularly from STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and we ensured that they would be able to have a place. But beyond that, let me tell you where we have where we go across income lines, where they're not those who have and those who have not. The first school that won was Dighton Griffith. They were in first place. St. Michael was number 2. Third place was Springer Memorial and Ellerslie, who joined forces to come out. We have promoted the programs across public and private so that we recognize, again, we are crossing what would be considered the income divide. We have students in our science programs. Our science camps, our science and technology camps are free, which mean, again, we are ensuring that those persons who would be less likely to have access to the know-how and the wherewithal, that they are protected. When we did DigiHacks last year, which is preparing children for cyber and the use of technology, 40+ students from the children's homes from across Barbados were engaged, and we did training for the aunties in the children's home. Again, making sure that we are willful and we are deliberate in being inclusive of persons from across all areas. And then when we do have something where there could be some exploitation of intellectual property, that we are building in a legal framework and the structure that will allow us to be able to protect from start.
Thank you
You
very much,
mentioned
Melissa.
the children from the children's homes. Just as a point of interest, did that ever include the children of the government industrial schools? Because we seem to tend to forget that they're
I will
there.
ask Mr. Charles Cyrus of the National Council for Science and Technology to respond to that.
Wonderful. That means yes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, I don't think the children from the government industrial school was involved. We look at the children's homes, Lillicott, McNamas, Ellington Horsey. Those were the 3 centers that the students came from.
Was it just an oversight? I wonder. Because I mean, we have young children in there, 12, 13, 14, that are going to eventually become a part of the society again. Will they be leaving the industrial schools without the knowledge to equip them, without the opportunities for even the game changers? A lot of these children are actually bright. Might be naughty, but they might be bright. Maybe it might be worth looking into that area as well. We still have to be inclusive.
It was definitely not an oversight, but it was where we were able to get persons responding immediately to this. I think what is going to be good, though, is that we have the opportunity in this financial year, 2020, 2021, to continue to extend that net and perhaps include persons as well from the areas where you are, from the industrial school as well. So thank you very much for,
Quite
you know,
welcome.
raising that as well.
Okay, honorable member for Christchurch West Central.
All you had to say, Madam Chair, all due respects, is the epicenter of Christchurch. I would accept that. I want to thank the Minister, the Honourable Minister, for taking the baton and running with it. As a former athlete, she would understand the literal sense of that, but certainly in its metaphorical sense, the changing and redefining the way of life in this digital and technological era that we live in. And I want to ask, because I want to reflect on the 24th page of our manifesto, which speaks to a Youth Innovation Award. I just want to ask the Minister, what is the plan to roll out this award, which will seek to unlock the creative, scientific, technological talents of our young people, as we seek to provide a group and a workforce and a reform and redefine young cohort that are able to exist and transform our country in the way that we know how they can. What is the plan for this award, and how long do you think that this country will have to wait till we get this award on board?
I'm going to ask Madam Chair, the director, the acting director of the National Council for Science and Technology, under whose remit this would fall, to answer and respond.
Thank you very much, Minister. Madam Chair, actually, the Youth Innovation Award is linked to the Game Changers Award. In this fourth cohort, we have tied the Youth Innovation Award to the Game Changers, because the Game Changers Award, we are in the first pilots, so to speak, we are actually targeting students at the sixth forms. Our target has been students at the sixth forms, including the Barbados Community College and the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology. So we're targeting 16 to 18. We want to build out innovation. We're looking at the gaming industry, as the minister mentioned earlier. All right. So there's a link between the Youth Innovation Award and the Game Changers Award, which has already started. We had our first meeting on Saturday at the Barbados Community College. We have 21 teams from all of the secondary schools. Yes.
Honorable member for St. James South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to the team from MIST. Let me tell you, I'm really very proud of the mandate that you have and the work that you have been doing, because I recognize that your success will really transform Barbados. I just have two questions for you. One pertains to what was just asked by the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South. And my further question about the engagement and protection of people with products and so on. There's some, like in my constituency, I had one young person who had developed the Easy Save program that you probably see at a couple of businesses around. Youngster. And he has been guided and mentored by a more senior manager. I have another one who has done an app, and he talked to me about it like it was like writing an essay, you know, and I was really deeply impressed. My concern is, how does your ministry, what kind of flow is there for that person to engage the ministry? Because young people tend not to engage government very much because they don't know how it works, and it seems to be full of fuddy-duddies in their mind, and they don't know how to engage the space to get their product or service thing. So if there's a framework in place so that some of these products that these young people develop could be then commercialized properly and used in not only dealing with Barbados, but has value abroad.
I believe that government has a number of programs that assist entrepreneurs. And there are a number of programs, whether it's through small business, or whether it's through youth entrepreneurship, or whether it's through any of the number of other programs out there, where I believe there would be some kind of support for those persons. We tend, in our ministry, for the programs that we run, we tend to create the whole ecosystem around them. And part of that would be a referral process, a simple referral process at that particular time. If it does not fit within the scope of the program that we have in place, it is through referral to some of government's other services. And there are also some services that are not in government, but they're nonprofit sector. I know 10 Habitat and some others, they do tremendous work as well. So it is referral if it does not fit within the scope of the package program that we have within the ministry.
But do you have a process where young people who have something that they think would be useful to government or solve a problem, do they come straight to you? What do they do with their idea? What I find happens is that they try to find whoever they know in government to ask a question and so on. But I'm just asking if we have a process by which they can engage and demonstrate what they're doing and see the possibility of being included in what is happening.
I'm going to ask the project manager for the public sector modernization program to respond to that. Because currently there is a situation where that individual did a demonstration of a particular application that they have, and they did it, in fact, to Minister King, as well as to the Prime Minister herself. And through that kind of engagement, was then able to have it done in, used in a test situation. So I'm going to invite Mr. Rodney Payne, sorry, who is the project manager for the public sector modernization, just to speak a little bit about how we were able to support that.
Thank you, Minister. Madam Chair, Rodney Payne, project manager, public sector modernization program. Thank you, Minister, Honorable Minister, for your question. The Chief Archivist is the head of our digitization committee, and which has responsibility for records management and ensure digitization. Mr. Christian Payne, the young man, he was engaged to use his app in a pilot project to transcribe the written record to a digitization format. It's an early program, so therefore the young person was given the opportunity to see how this would work for the archives department. And in an iterative process, once that program, which is artificial intelligence, continue to learn, the expectation is that it can be used within other departments. So to answer the minister's question, they're given the opportunity, and once it's rolled out, they'll be able to use it, and then they can be directed to the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, which will give them the information in how to protect themselves with regards to their new application.
Okay, thank you. Let me make a suggestion that we also have a number of young people in the diaspora, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade is seeking to find where our diaspora are and the skills that they have. And we actually have a number of them who have done IT and have worked with some of the best companies in the world with their skills. So I want to be able to make a connection between them and you, so that things that they do or can help with, that they can then be a part of the wonderful thing that you're doing. So I'd like to make that offer. The last question has to do with your telecoms unit. I see here that you've completed an audit of the quality of service. I don't know how much you can share with us, but I know utilities and there has been a problem for some consumers in Barbados. And I just wondered what progress y'all were making on that, because I know that's another important part of your work and what you do.
All right, thank you, Honorable Member, for that question. I'm going to invite Mr. Clifford Bostic, who is our Chief Telecommunications Officer, acting, to respond to that question.
Pleasant good afternoon. Thanks for your question. We did an audit back in April 2019, and it was to confirm some of our beliefs in the ministry as to what the issues were with the quality of service in mobile. The audit unraveled 5 areas that are of interest to us. The first one was interference, and that's where signals from the operators were interfering with one another. The second one was coverage. There were some areas in Barbados where you cannot get a signal, so you cannot make a call, you cannot connect to the internet and so on via mobile. The third area was the time it took for calls to connect. So you dial a number and you'd be there waiting 15 seconds after no connection. The third area was dropouts or disconnections. You're on a call, you're driving, or you're probably walking around the home, and then the call just drops. And if the fourth area was things, for example, throughput, what we call throughput, the speed that you could upload and the speed that you could download. And the final area was where you're on a call and for some or no reason the call just drops out. So what we did was we engaged an international consultancy firm to actually come to Barbados, an independent agency, which was recommended through the International Telecommunications Union. And they sat and they did what customers in Barbados would replicate. So they did drive testing, where they connected all 3 networks simultaneously, and they drove around the country, all through the highways and byways and the various communities. And we discovered that for interference, one of the resolutions was to have custom-built filters on the networks, mainly on rooftops and areas where there is co-location, where more than one cell provider has antennas and equipment radiating to our communities. In those areas, there were about 35 sites that had issues. The operators ordered custom-built filters and installed those. To date, there are 22 sites that have been completed, and the other 13 are in process of being completed. And any other new sites will be installed with filters to stop the signals from interfering with one another. And the second thing we did when it comes to interference was to increase the guard band. In other words, increase the distance between the frequencies so as to avoid interference across the country. In the area of coverage, and I believe most of you know where these areas are, St. Andrew, it's Christchurch, St. Michael, all highways, parts of St. Philip, parts of St. Joseph, practically all over Barbados. There are areas where you just can't get coverage. So one of the recommendations made and were adopted and committed by the service operators was one, to go and tune those antennas. Let's make some adjustments to those antennas so that as you move from one cell site to another, you wouldn't lose connectivity. In other words, you wouldn't have dropouts. Another area was to improve the number of cell sites in Barbados. And for this, they've had to get town and country planning approval and approval from persons who own land and buildings to add more cell sites. And the other one was to upgrade the actual services being provided through these cell sites. In the area of call dropouts, we know why that takes place. If there's no good coverage, the call is going to drop out. If there's issues with capacity, where there are lots of customers on cell sites in particular areas and along the south coast into Warrens and Bridgetown and the west coast, those are the areas where lots of customers are calling to make voice calls or to connect, to browse the web, to watch streaming like this event taking place today. So those areas require more bandwidth, more capacity to meet the demand for services. Then in the area of timeouts where the call just won't connect, again, it's capacity issues, and the operators know exactly what they needed to do with their networks to build out capacity and improve on the services. With call dropouts, it's about the same thing, just fine-tuning the network. And when it came to the area of capacity in terms of internet connectivity, what's the download speed or download bandwidth, how much information you can download, how much information you can send up to the network. This has been an issue with us. In Barbados, we are a place where the demand for bandwidth, the demand for data is high. The moment you increase that bandwidth, we eat it up because we are busy with social events, religious events, learning, doing business. We demand a lot of bandwidth. So our infrastructure has not taken step with the demand. So we are working with the operators collaboratively to make sure this is fixed in the future. Fixed now, and it continues to be of sustainable quality. So for the future, one of the things that we have started to do is we've had conversations with the Fair Trading Commissioner, as the Minister said earlier in her opening remarks. We are actually collaborating with them because they take care of consumer protection, and what the consumers receive is or get is a result of how the network is set up and what metrics we put in place. So we're talking about quality of service standards. We're going to set the standards so that once the network standards are set, the customer standards can be set about the same time, and we're working with the FTC to do just that. We're going to move into the area of setting a framework, a legislative framework to deal with legislation and regulation, because you've got consumer protection, you've got utility regulations, and you've got the Telecommunications Act, quality of service regulation and legislation. So we are working together with them. This week you should see, fingers crossed, the cabinet paper come into cabinet for approval for us to proceed in that manner. And we believe once we set that in place, we will then have not just the commitment of the service providers, but also their action, and we would know when the quality of service is not going to be what it's supposed to be and correct that before we have to go through years and years and years of poor service. And we're not going to stop there because there are fixed services, your fixed telephone in your home and your businesses, your internet at home and in your businesses, as well as IPTV and other services that are going to come down the pipeline. That's going to help us. The only way we're going to survive as a digital environment is if we have the right infrastructure in place with the right standards and frameworks in place that will make sure that as we use more data, as we have more demand on the capacity that's available, that there's a framework for which this can be improved in a consistent and sustainable way.
Thank you very much. I am looking forward to the resolution of those things because I live in one of the 13 black holes that they haven't fixed yet. So I would appreciate that.
Minister, I'm sorry Mr. Payne left before he could comment on something the honorable member would have said. I was interested in hearing when you spoke about the young entrepreneur with respect to his program. And you went through a process before you got to his being protected legally for his intellectual property. Could you go over that flow again? Because I'm meeting people that have wonderful ideas but are even scared to go to government for fear of somebody stealing it, as they will put it. Could you go over the process that he has to go through again with me, please?
Thanks, Madam Chair. What I'm saying is that the persons are given the opportunity to use their software development app, whatever, within the different departments. They will start, then it improves, and then you'll be able to use it in another department. For example, the same Christian Payne, he will be working with archives in the first instance. And then the program that he's developing, Laura, it also has a component to recognize voice, as it's a learning AI. And he would be able to give a demonstration to the registration department who will be interested in such a app to deal with within the course. There's also the opportunity to work with the Inter-American Development Bank through a program called Lab, where the young persons, young individuals can present their apps to them and see how they perform. Even if it doesn't perform well, they give them the opportunity to try again, and they will give them the opportunity to be trained as an entrepreneur and also allow them to understand what intellectual property is with their products. So the ministry, with that partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank and Lab, will invite the young persons to present their programs, their services, products, and apps so that we can go through that process.
So all this time they're not protected? In other words, what's to stop somebody in your ministry, sorry to say, or whoever ministry, from stealing my idea? Is there some provision for protection until the legal framework is put aside? Just trying to understand.
Madam Chair, if you'd permit, I'm going to ask the other Rodney Taylor, who is in charge of the Tech Accelerator. There's a structure within the Tech Accelerator that handles this very same situation. So I'm going to invite Mr. Rodney Taylor to come and complete that answer.
Thank you, Minister. Madam Chair, the program that the Minister referred to, which would encapsulate not just this young gentleman, but other innovators in Barbados, is the Barbados Tech Accelerator program. And we are modeling that after the Scotland's CivTech program. What it is, it provides a framework for young innovators. We start from the point of view of the challenge. What is the challenge or the public issue that we're trying to solve? Whether it may be in sanitation or it may be in public transportation, all right? Because, you know, there are many ideas out there, but how do we turn them into viable businesses? And that's what the Barbados Tech Accelerator is about. It starts with the challenge, and then it allows and it provides the opportunity for young innovators to address those challenges, to come up with ideas, whether it is through a mobile app or some other use of technology to address that issue. And it also imparts skills such as entrepreneurship, and it also brings, in conjunction with that, it brings investors on board as well. So it is a comprehensive program that we are again modeling after Scotland's very successful CivTech program, that would bring them from ideation through to an actual solution with the full protection in terms of intellectual property as well.
Great.
And that is something that we're rolling out early in the new financial year.
Thank you so much for your indulgence. Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, you mentioned earlier that there was some work going on with the Chief Archivist, and as that falls underneath my ministry, I would wish for any member of the team to be able to talk a little bit about the engagement and express if there are any pros and cons that we should know about in terms of where that program is going, how it will impact on the safekeeping of records.
Our Permanent Secretary is going to respond.
Madam Chair, Honorable Member, as part of the modernization program in the public sector, we are seeking to roll out an electronic documents and records management system. By its nature, we're dealing with the records within government, and that falls under the purview of your ministry and the Chief Archivist. A digitalization committee has been set up. She's the chair of the committee, and she'll be responsible for the actual rollout of the EDRMS and the digitalization of records within the public service. So your ministry plays a critical role in the success of the EDRMS.
Honorable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I may have missed it, but I wanted to find out. I'm speaking from behind the column for the minister's sake. I should have shifted. But as it relates to wider Barbados taking advantage of the unfolding ICT space, my question is, what provision is being made for ordinary people in the far-flung corners of the country to be able to benefit from that in terms of access to technology? What, if the minister or her team, some member of her team, could speak to what concrete steps are being taken to ensure that ordinary people with good ideas, or even curious people, especially young people, are able to access the platforms that are available or that could become available and use those platforms to develop ideas, to explore ideas, and to maybe generally just be curious and explore that curiosity.
I'm not sure what's being asked. Is the question the platforms that are being created for government, how are young people able to access them? Or is it for all of the services government is putting out there,
No, but
how are ordinary people able
that doesn't
to
clarify.
access them?
For clarification, I'm referring to like basic access to internet, one, or maybe access to devices, to be able to use those platforms that you began to speak about.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Minister. We recognize that there are some persons out there who do not have internet in their houses. There are some people who do not have computers. There are some people who may not even know how to use it. One of the programs that we have put in place is called Digital Ambassadors. And for a number of people who were, let me go back before I go forward. The digital ambassadors are these young people who are deployed near home and in community to support everyday people who maybe don't have the confidence in using the technology, who don't have the technology in their homes. What we do is we deploy them in the resource centers and the community centers. And they are there for a period of time so that people can then come and they will be able to help them until such time. This is something we will continue throughout. We trained last year 90 digital ambassadors. 72 actually graduated. We've deployed about 38, and they work during the TAMIS to bring a number of people who were in precisely those situations. I'm not comfortable with the technology, I don't know how to use it, I don't have a device, etc. And they were in community centers, libraries, and resource centers across Barbados over a period of a couple of months. And they registered hundreds of Barbadians onto TAMIS to get them registered on their number. In fact, today I think the honorable member from St. James North mentioned that in post offices today, they are out there deployed today seeking to help people with their certificate of character who would be interested. So one of the things we are doing is making sure there are human resources deployed in community and near their homes with their own part of helping to raise the digital intelligence in their own communities. And they're providing hand-holding support. They're not just sharing what is being used or how to do it, but they're actually holding the hands of those people through the process of actually doing, so that from the beginning of the engagement to the end, they can say, aha, now I have a TAMIS number, aha, now I have registered on Easy, aha, now I have done something. So their support is practical, direct, hand-holding in communities.
Could I just follow to ask, that sounds like the use of existing platforms. What I wanted, if you could expand a little bit more on a youngster with just an idea. Are there plans to have labs set up somewhere, someplace where a youngster can go with an idea, but without the access to technology. And I'm not sure if the digital ambassadors do that, but is there a plan to have that? I'm asking because there are a lot of young people across the island who, and I've been finding out this more and more as an MP. When I thought that everybody had a cell phone or had access to internet, I'm realizing that there are quite a number of young people who don't. So that's really where I'm going with the question. Any plans to have labs, these innovative spaces where people can go to actually work on some idea that they have?
Innovation Center was one of the areas that was discussed by Mr. Charles Cyrus. They do not exist right now, but we have started the process of conversation. In fact, just last week, was it Wednesday, we were down at Harbor Industrial Park looking at buildings. Then we were up on that road near Springer Memorial looking at studios for those who are doing content. So we have now been scoping out where are the facilities around Barbados that we may be able to use to set up innovation centers. And the concept of an innovation center being just this one place is not what we're thinking. We're thinking that you may have people who want to do content for television over yonder. We may be, and you have a studio that already exists. So we need to do an inventory of what spaces we have in Barbados that could work for this. And over yonder might be where they do robotics, and that's the Innovation Center for Robotics. And over here is where you have that Innovation Center for Artificial Intelligence and doing some interesting things. And over there is where you have an Innovation Center for apps. So the intention is not just necessarily to have this one place, but there may be several places where we use the facilities that Barbados has to be able to create almost hotspots for particular types of technology. We're not there yet, but we have started not only conversations, but we have started looking around Barbados, and we're putting the inventory of those spaces together as we move forward.
Honorable member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question really is to any member of the team. There is an issue which is a little bit dated, and about which I believe there had been some progress, but I'm seeking to give you the opportunity to provide the country with a statement that brings some clarity of purpose and direction. For the average person out there who is a the clerks at the table have their technological challenges, ma'am. I'm glad it isn't one of us, because you would have been well within your rights to put us out. No, I was saying, ma'am, that the average person, or the average business person out there uses his or her cell phone. A small business person, small and micro business people especially are on my mind now, tend to use their cell phone as the way in which they relate to their clientele, their client base. And the challenge really is that very often, and I count myself among these cases, you become a little bit disaffected with the quality of service of your service provider. In the context of a marketplace where there is choice, which is where we are, it is anticipated that there should be an ease of a person being able to move from one service provider to the other without losing his or her cell phone number, because that really has become a part of your identity. If you've had the cell phone number for a long time, your clients know where to find you and how to find you by that number. The challenge now is we have heard that this is something that obviously should be corrected, but where are we specifically with that process? Because it is very important to the small and micro business people, certainly in my constituency, and I would expect that we are not unique in St. James Central, but that this is a problem for small and micro business people across Barbados.
Thank you, Honorable Member. This relates partly to the matter of number portability. And the Honorable Member may recall that I took a paper to Cabinet and we did in fact pass the necessary regulations as it relates to number portability. And I'm going to invite Mr. Clifford Bostic, our Chief Telecommunications Officer, to provide the Honorable Member with the update he requested.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thanks for your question, Minister. Where we are today is that we will be restarting the local number portability project in April. We came across an issue where one of the providers had asked us for some leniency in terms of funding for the last 3 parts of the project, and that is the testing, the marketing of the product, as well as the customer service aspect of local number portability. What that means is that the networks have been set up with the ability to do porting from one of the service providers to another, and there are 3 of them. What has to be done now is the testing, and as well as the marketing of number portability, and the final step is the customer service aspect of it, so that each person in Barbados would know what's the correct process importing their number from one customer to another. There have been quite some errors made in the Caribbean islands when it came to this product, and we do not want to go through that, because we want to make sure that once we launch number portability, that every person who wants to port their number has the right process, has been well trained, and can do the porting without any issues. Thank you.
If I may, by way of a further follow-up for specificity only, I think the average person, again, out there, having heard that this is part of government's plan, and if they're anything like me, is anxious to be able to benefit from the plan, would want to know whether there is a specific end date in mind, or is this being left open-ended? In other words, have we set a line in the sand where we say this is the point by which it must happen?
Yes.
Mr. Bostic would have just indicated that there were some special requests made of us, given the particular different circumstances of some of the players in the market. And I'm trying to be as careful as I can in terms of saying that. And we thought that everyone should have reasonable opportunity to be able to benefit from this at the time, and so we gave an extension. It is certainly our intention not to end the 2020-2021 financial year not having made this happen for the people of Barbados. It does require collaboration, and it does cost. And so we have to make sure that everyone is in a position to be able to benefit. When I say everyone, I'm talking about all of the telecommunications players, so that there's enough of a level playing field as we can to make sure everyone can benefit.
Thank you. I have one inquiry, really. Would your ministry get involved with it seems to be, and it's growing in Barbados, people applying for and obtaining jobs abroad, but working from Barbados, via the internet, for instance. Is your ministry going to be a part of that, given the climate at which we're in, where jobs are not readily available for some people out there? Are we going to bring in that, where we can get online jobs or anything like that? Or that doesn't fall under you?
That, Madam Chair, does not fall squarely within the remit of our ministry, but we imagine that through some of the programs that we are designing, it will happen organically, but not that is something that we are specifically mandated to do or that we would be involved in at this time.
Thank you. Nobody else. Would you like to give your wrap-up, please, and ask that the head stand part?
Madam, I will do my wrap-up. I believe that as I am a member of the other place, I might not have the authority to ask for the head to stand part in this honorable house.
This is true. My bad.
I would have to rest on the good
Agreed.
nature of my friends. Well, I just want to say that I want to first of all thank the members of this honorable house for the questions that they posed. I think it gave us an opportunity to share a bit more than we could have in our opening remarks. And we trust that it is understood that the kind of Barbados that we want to create, and one where we're focusing on in 2020, 2021, and will certainly continue to focus on after that, is one where things work, where lines are shorter or they're gone, where people waste less time, bus fare and gas, trying to perform simple transactions with government, where unproductive time that is spent away from family and business trying to get things done with government. We all believe that these are things that we would like to see go, and we believe that making the transition to digital and creating the kind of environment for Barbados that this ministry is supporting, that will be the way forward. We have a long way to go, Madam Chair. We have a long way to travel to digital transformation, and the journey has begun. We have begun. While we all want things to go faster, I know that. I have heard the honorable members in this house, I've heard the public. We want things to go fast, including more services online and made easier. One of the things we have to understand, though, is that we have to put the proper infrastructure in place first before we can go as quickly as we would like. Many of us in here would not construct a house and go putting on the roof before we have made sure that the foundation is sufficiently solid. And so there's much infrastructural work that we still have to put in place as a government in a number of different areas, and we will continue to build that foundation even as we make those little steps towards putting other services online. There's a bit of legislation that also has to be put in place in terms of creating the kind of environment that we would like, and we will continue to be a part of that, and that includes the overhaul of the telecommunications legislation and the fact that there's no convergence between broadcasting and telecommunications, and that has significant implications from a legislative perspective for the things that we do. There is 5G that is coming into play, and that has implications for how we manage the waves that are up there, the spectrum that is up there. That's the type of legislation that has to come into place. One of the honorable members, the leader of the opposition, mentioned cyber security. That is a different type of legislation also that we also need to start beefing up and putting in place. And so we recognize that it's not just infrastructure and legislation, but we also have to upskill our public service, we have to build their confidence, and we have to reorient their minds to citizen care, not just public service. We need to do research to ensure that Barbados is benchmarking against the best, and that we're not just benchmarking to copy, but we're benchmarking to leap over and indeed be able to deliver at world-class levels. We need to build not only the foundational infrastructure to fit what government wants to do in terms of doing digital well, we also need to make sure that we are building the kinds of platforms and we are taking care of the protection of data and critical assets. In general, there's a lot to be done, and the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology, we are certainly gearing up to be able to do much of that work, and we understand we cannot do it alone, and we are reaching out for the collaborative relationships that will enable this. We look forward to the continued collaborations across government with the private sector and with the third sector as we seek to move towards a more digital economy. And with these words, I thank you very much for the opportunity to present these estimates on behalf of the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology.
Chairperson, I beg to move that Head 31 stand par.
Question is that Head 31 in the amount of $14,141,075 stand par. All honorable members, pardon?
Second.
All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 36, Ministry of Energy and Water Resources, 28,556,277.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to call my support system from the ministry and my SOEs to join.
So granted. Honorable Minister, we invite your opening remarks.
Madam Chair, the last year has been a most interesting year in our ministry. It is well known by now, both in Barbados and toward the rest of the Caribbean and the wider world, that Barbados has adopted the ambitious target of becoming the first small island state to reach 100% generation of electricity by renewable energy, and we intend to do this by 2030. Since we've made the announcement of our grand plans, a number of territories, a number of countries which had targets ranging from 2050, 2045 have actually come down, but the next most ambitious one is at 2035. So Barbados's renewable energy and carbon neutral push is perhaps the most ambitious in this hemisphere, is definitely the most ambitious in the Caribbean. And my ministry, Madam Chair, most people who pay attention to our ministry believe that I'm the Minister of Water alone. And most people don't realize that there are other aspects and statutory companies that fall under my ministry, and these include BNOC, Barbados National Oil Company Limited, which, although it is named the National Oil Company Limited, it is more operating as the Barbados National Energy Company Limited because they've also branched into the area of renewable energy. The National Petroleum Corporation, the Barbados National Terminal Company Limited, and the Barbados Water Authority. Madam Chair, with respect to water, in the area of water, the water has been a very, very challenging one for us because we inherited a system, and I can't even blame this one on the last 10 years. We inherited a system that was created in the empire, when Britain was an empire. A number of our pipes and our infrastructure are 100 to 150 years old. And we are now experiencing the perfect storm with drought conditions that we've not experienced for the last 60 years, the worst drought in 60 years, declining reserves in our aquifers, and we also have aging pipes. So even when we manage to get water into the pipes, between 40 and 60% of that water is unaccounted for in terms of billing. So in addition to being the ministry charged with the task of transforming Barbados' energy landscape, we also are the ministry charged with bringing our water infrastructure, kicking and screaming, into this third decade of the 21st century. Madam Chair, what have we done? Over the last year, Barbados has advanced its renewable energy generation capacity significantly. As we go through Barbados, you will see solar panels on most government institutions, solar panels on schools, on community centers. The Light and Power has invested very, very heavily. That's our vertically integrated monopoly at present. They've invested very heavily in solar generation and also battery storage, and they're about to embark in the area of wind energy as well. Many businesses are also utilizing their roof space for solar generation. The National Oil Company Limited has a very ambitious plan as well to cover 30,000 roofs in Barbados within the next couple of years. So why is this so important to us? Why do we need to get there? Apart from the altruistic aspect of it, where the Caribbean as a group has one of the smallest carbon footprints in the world, but yet we are the ones most on the front line of the climate change effects. We all know what is happening with the frequency and intensity of the storms in the hurricane season. Once upon a time, for there even to be a Category 5 storm was a rare occurrence. Now Category 5 storms are every single year, and they're hitting land every year, to the point where they're considering creating a new category of storm, Category 6, because the intensity of the storms has become that significant. So we quite clearly bear the brunt. We're on the front line of the war that is climate change. We've seen what happened to Dominica a couple years ago. We saw what happened to Bahamas last year, where one weather event can wipe out decades or generations of progress. It can wipe out the economy of a country in one. We have been very lucky. But the reality is that at some point in time, a significant weather event is going to hit Barbados. So while we know that one will eventually hit us, it does not serve us well to sit down and wait on it. What we have to do is put ourselves in a position where we can bounce back quickly when that event happens. And they call that resilience. I hate to use that word because it's almost becoming overused in the environmental sectors and the climate change sectors. But we actually need to become resilient as a country. There are areas in Dominica that still don't have electricity since the storm. Right now we have all of our eggs in one basket. The Barbados Light and Power is the monopoly utility. They have their major generation plants at Spring Garden and out by the Garrison. And these plants are both located within 200 meters of the shore. So the reality is that if a serious hurricane hits us, then those plants stand to be wiped out, and that is the majority of the generation capacity in Barbados. So if that was to happen, we would not be done. We complained. We had an instance last year where we had 2 days of disrupted electricity, and that was a major blow for Barbadians. But if we had a major weather event, we would not be without electricity for 2 days. We would probably be without electricity a lot longer than that, because all of our electrical generation capacity is consolidated in what is perhaps the most vulnerable area if a storm was to hit. So we're looking at distributed generation of electricity. We're in the process of negotiating new licenses with the Barbados Light and Power. And these licenses, while we accept that the Light and Power, the utility, owns the grid, the majority of the grid, and they should still have a greater share of the transmission and distribution capacity or the business associated with transmission and distribution, it cannot now be monopoly generation in Barbados. We have to look at distributed generation of electricity. What I mean by that is, as opposed to all of it being centered in one area, you have pockets of distribution. We're looking at independent power producers. We're looking at other people setting up solar farms, and that also helps to enfranchise Barbadians, because the average Barbadian can get involved in that space. We're trying to bring the credit unions on board to give a real chance for return. The returns now, the feed-in tariff as it now stands, is one of the most generous in the world. In the world, Madam Chair. But we have done that and kept that to actually cause an explosion of investment in the renewable energy space in Barbados. We're looking at the revamping of our licensing regime. We're looking at how we're looking. One second, Chair. Yes, Madam Chair. We're looking at how we apply the licensing process, trying to make life simple. I recently came back, Madam Chair, from the Latin American Energy Conference, and an energy conference in Jamaica as well, and there are a lot of investors who are looking at our space. They are very interested in doing business in Barbados because you stand to make certain returns in the renewable energy space. Renewable energy is the new big thing in the world. Most persons in the space accept that we cannot continue as we are. If we look at Barbados alone, as I said, it's not just altruistic. We simply cannot afford to keep spending our foreign exchange on oil. One of the biggest drainers on our foreign exchange reserves in Barbados is the purchase of oil and to generate electricity. So if we can secure the generation of electricity from natural renewable sources and limit the outflow of the foreign exchange to create that capacity, then we've come out ahead of the curve. Madam Chair, this is a useful point to segue into the connection between water and energy. This is the first time that we've had a Ministry of Energy and Water Resources. And why that has turned out to be a very good thing is that the Barbados Water Authority is the single largest customer outside of government, that's central government, of the Barbados Light and Power. The Barbados Water Authority uses more electricity in its natural business than any other entity or company in Barbados. So effectively it goes hand in glove. The Water Authority has already as well embarked upon its renewable energy consolidation. We have become vulnerable to variables and anomalies with the electricity supply in Barbados. Any issues on the grid, it tends to trip out something because the equipment at the Barbados Water Authority is very, very sensitive. And when it trips out a pump, for example, if there's a fluctuation, it might not even cause your current to go off, but that fluctuation might trip out a pump. If the pump goes, the capacity of what it was pumping then goes. Half the time we don't realize this. We're trying to upgrade our SCADA system and become a lot more mechanical, automatic in our assessments and our monitoring of our systems, but we're not entirely there yet. Sometimes our systems trip out and we don't even know. The pumps burn out. You then lose that capacity. Once the capacity in the pipes comes down, it takes a while for the capacity to come back up. We had a situation recently where Hampton Pumping Station had some issues, and that was about 2 weeks ago. The water was off in various parts of Christchurch and St. Philip. Even when the station corrected itself, or when we corrected the issues at the station, it would normally take 24 hours for the system to recharge properly and get pressure back into the system. And it didn't recharge. We couldn't understand why it wasn't recharging. 24 hours passed, 48 hours passed. The water was trickling in some areas, shutting off in some, coming back on in some. And something was wrong, but everything that we had control or sight over appeared to be right. And it's only by literally walking the pipe work and the mains with leak detection equipment that we found a massive burst main somewhere in Fairview, in St. Philip, that we otherwise would not have known. So we now need to start to control all aspects of our production line. So the Water Authority is responsible for delivering a safe, potable, efficient source of water to the people of Barbados. But we can't do that if we are dependent entirely on another entity over which we have no control or input to secure our generation capacity and to power us. The Barbados Water Authority currently has 2 solar installations, one at Lakes Folly in Bridgetown. If you pass down by Kensington, out Fondabel side, you will see the solar car park down there. And that solar car park yields, I don't know the exact figure, but I think it's over $60,000 a month. What? Like $60,000 per quarter to the Barbados Water Authority. We have a larger system at Bowmanston, but we're looking at having generation capacity at all of our installations, because in the event that we do have a weather event and Light and Power goes, I don't want to keep calling them by name, you know, defamation and all that. The utility, the monopoly goes down, then we are dependent on the restoration of their service in order to provide water to the people of Barbados, and that's not something we actually want. We want, as a ministry, for our water supply and pumping capacity to be self-sustaining and isolated entirely from the vagaries of the current grid system. So, over the course of the last year, we signed an MOU with Trinidad and Tobago with respect to unitization, exploration of hydrocarbons on our joint borders. Somebody I heard recently over the last 2 days said they're tired of hearing the word MOU and they prefer to hear the phrase MODU. So, never having heard the phrase, but actually following the general scheme of thinking, we, in a short order, actually got to a point of being able to sign a treaty with Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the exploration of hydrocarbons on our joint boundaries. We, in addition, have signed a practical agreement with BHP Billiton, who was awarded a license in 2007, 2008, but it didn't progress past that point in any substantial way until over the last 2 years. And I don't like to call people's names specifically, but there's a young man he's behind me. At some point in time, he's going to represent himself in our ministry. That when I came into the ministry and I was pushing and saying we had all these grand plans, he looked at me as one with entire disbelief. And I said, "Why aren't you excited? This is your area." He said, "I've heard it all before." I said, "But we are pushing now to really start our exploration." He said, "I've heard it all before." Well, Madam Chair, I will be happy to say that I saw him smile for the first time last week when we got $11 million as the effective signing bonus from BHP Billiton. So, Madam Chair, a lot has happened. With respect to water, I guess I will cover more of it in the actual questions. With respect to water itself, Madam Chair, we recently had a Find All and Fix All extended hours program where we had 11,000 complaints logged into our system. Some of them were duplicates. We actually did not know how many bursts had been reported, and we systematically set about to locate every single one and fix it. And what is really great about that initiative is we allowed the workers themselves, the Barbados Workers Union and the workers, to design their work program, to cost it out, to give us the deadlines, give us the deliverables, and we put it in their hands, and they came through with flying colors. And that is a perfect example of what happens when labor, management, and the political will happen to collide together. So, thank you. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to say that whereas up to a couple months ago you had people saying, "I reported this pipe 2 years ago, burst, and nobody's come to fix it," or "This thing has been running for the last 4 weeks and nobody's come to fix it." We are current now with all of the burst reports in Barbados. So anything we are fixing now is something that was reported within the last 24 hours. And we have now our mains fixing. If in event of a large main, we are fixing those within 24 hours. As was evidenced by the massive one we found in St. Philip, we found that. To be honest, normally I understand it would have taken about 7 days to fix that, but that was dealt with within 24 hours. So a lot has happened. There's a lot more to do. Our estimates reflect a cut over last year. But Madam Chair, we are aware that things are not where we want them to be at this moment, and we have to work within constraints. But our ministry has shown some initiative, and it's shown its ability to do a lot with a little. And I'm expecting that this year, Madam Chair, we will do the most with the least. So I open, Madam Chair, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I'd like to move to the headstand part.
Honorable Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your opening presentation and for your presence here and that of your team. Ma'am, I would have noted before me some issues which I consider to be of significance and to which perhaps I would have spoken this afternoon and would have asked to have addressed. These include the matter of the harsh impact of water rates on Barbadians, both individuals as well as businesses. And there are water rates, irrespective of what we choose to call them or how we choose to characterize them. They are seen as increases in water rates, having a telling effect negatively upon the pockets of individuals, business. I would have wanted to raise some issues about the Barbados Water Authority and the arrangements with Innotech, outages in rural Barbados which persists, especially in a context where we are anticipating further drought conditions. The mains repair program of the Barbados Water Authority. I wanted to have raised perhaps some issues relative to the FTC position of ratings relative to energy in Barbados, issues relative to South Coast sewage operations, update on that. I haven't heard much on that for a while. Certainly, I would have wanted to hear something on the arrangements further with Trinidad with respect to oil exploration. Would have been important that I raise the matter of the BLMP capacity, especially in light of what the Honorable Minister just intimated, and the whole issue of moving away from monopoly in the energy sector in Barbados. Then, of course, we have to consider the building and building out of a green energy architecture in Barbados, and potentially how we will capitalize, or the government will assist in capitalizing domestic investment in renewables in Barbados. These and some other issues. But, Madam Chair, and this is not with any disrespect to this Honorable Minister, because he's always been kind and considerate of me and has always been accommodating of me, and no disrespect to his team either. But I have chosen to send a signal again, not for the first time, to this government, that it must behave itself better, because it would have been courteous if the opposition could have been advised that perhaps we will be looking at the estimates relative to this ministry on this day. Nobody in the cabinet has spoken to me of that. I know the absence of the substantive leader of government business, and I presume, therefore, she may be off island, and in recent times she has been keeping me up to date. The Honourable Member for the City, Honourable Minister of Health, deputizes for her in that capacity, and I have not seen much of him today, and I imagine he's busy with matters of COVID-19, and that is totally understandable. And the Honourable Member for St. James North is standing in today, and perhaps he himself may not have been sufficiently and early advised. But it is not good that we continue to do this. It may be an opposition of 1 against 28 or 29. It may be that there are, 41 voices for the government in the Parliament of Barbados, and 9 on the part of the opposition. But I think when we come to matters of the people's business of this serious import, we really have to be a bit more professional in this. And I came in here this morning with an understanding that we would continue with the Ministry of Youth Affairs, and we duly did, and that perhaps we would hear from the Ministry of Innovation and Smart Technology, I think that's what it is, and possibly the Ministry of Elder Affairs and Empowerment. It was you, Madam Chair, who in a private aside advised me on my query that we may be doing energy, and therefore I've had no time properly to prepare for this debate, as should be the case. Now, out of regard for my honourable colleague, the Minister, who works hard to get the job done, and out of respect for the team, I could go on to pose some of these issues and raise these questions with you. We can have an exchange on these. These are important matters. But this government must understand that it cannot continue to do this nonsense. Numbers do not give you the right to do this. On that basis, Madam Chair, that's the last word you'll hear from me in this particular matter.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Before I start, allow me please to introduce those who are behind me at this point. Because my ministry is so extensive and has so many departments under it, there are others here who are not presently there, but as the circumstances arrive, we will swap in and out. But I'll just advise as to who is behind me now. On my right is Ms. Francine Blackman, the Permanent Secretary in our ministry. On my left is Permanent Secretary Andrew Giddens, who's also attached to the ministry and is responsible for the execution of the 2030 renewable energy goal. Ma'am, there's Mr. James Brown, who's the CEO of BNOC and MPC. The General Manager of Barbados Water Authority, Mr. Keith Roy Halliday. Mr. Brian Haynes, the Chief Project Analyst in the ministry. Ms. Keisha Reed, Project Manager in the ministry. Mr. Jamar White, Director of Natural Resources in the ministry. Dr. John Mwanza, who is with the Barbados Water Authority. Dr. Hugh Seeley, who is a Special Advisor to the government on energy matters, but he also works in conjunction with us on Water Authority matters. Mr. Charles Leslie, engineer from the Barbados Water Authority, senior engineer, and Director of Engineering, and Mr. William Hines, who's the Chief Energy Officer at the ministry. Madam Chair, if I might just address the concerns, the stated concerns of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
But, Madam Chair, point of order, with your leave, I did not put those concerns before the minister or before the committee. I said if I were to have participated in the debate, these are issues perhaps to which I would have loved to have spoken, but I have not so done. Now, the minister can proceed to respond if he chooses, but he should not take my departure from the chamber as a personal disrespect to him. But I'm not participating in this debate on this head for the reasons I've stated.
So, Madam Chair, having the Leader of the Opposition having stated his position, I appreciate some guidance as to which he would prefer me to address the comments that were raised by the Leader of the Opposition, obiter dicta, as it would appear, or if I should proceed to take other questions. I'd quite happily address the concerns for so long as he's in the chamber.
Madam Chair, if I may be allowed to speak from this position.
Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Yes. I really don't think that there's any substance in anything that the Leader of the Opposition has said. I've been in this Parliament now 30 years, and I would say that this is the first occasion that I've seen such close collaboration between a government and the Leader of the Opposition in terms of what heads should be called. There were occasions when I was in opposition, and we only knew when the heads were being called, when they were called. So I cannot see the purpose of his intervention.
Thanks, Honourable Member. I would rather you go on to questioning. Let's start with the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to firstly let me commend the Minister for his excellent work. I think that he's one of the hardest working ministers I have come across, and I want to commend him for that. My question relates to the opening statement that he made in his preamble, when he spoke to his vision, and certainly the vision of this entire government, to bring this country to a carbon neutral fossil fuel realization by 2030. The reality is that the world is now being threatened with the increase of carbon dioxide and the greenhouse effect, therefore having an impact as it relates to global warming. In 2019, 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide was produced. 37 billion tons, causing the levels in North America certainly around May, June to raise to 417 parts per million. In Barbados, it was just over 400 parts per million. I'm not being pedantic. This is as dangerous as it gets. And it forms a serious existential threat to life as we know it. I just want the minister to enumerate for us those in earshot and eyeshot so that we can have a graphic understanding, a lucid understanding of how you intend to roll out this plan, which I'm certainly in full support of over the next coming months, years. I want you to be able to talk this country through this plan because I feel that this is the most important plan for the development, certainly, and the sustainability of this little country, Barbados. So if you can enumerate for us, I would muchly appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to provide some context, right before the domination of the press by the coronavirus, what was dominating the press was climate change. And everybody everywhere is talking about it. If you think about it, Madam Chair, from the glaciers that formed in the Arctic and Antarctic, those took millions of years to form. But because of the increase in global temperatures, those same glaciers are melting, and it's affecting everything. It's affecting the levels of the sea, it's affecting natural habitats, it's affecting weather patterns, and what took millions of years to do is being undone in the space of 10 years. So even if we autocorrect now, let's say we got back to pre-10 years ago levels of consumption, levels of greenhouse gases, the temperatures that existed 10 years ago, it would take another couple of millions of years for the glaciers to put themselves, but for the Earth to rebalance. That's why it's important. Madam Chair, what does it entail? It entails a complete wiping away of the way that we do everything. In the same way that we are familiar with the internal combustion engine and we take it for granted that a car runs on gas, in the next 5 to 10 years, people coming up are going to take it for granted that a car runs on electricity. People in the world are still burning coal. The world itself, Madam Chair, has come to a position, the countries of the world came to a position that they're willing to tolerate no more than a 2% increase over the temperatures that existed at the beginning of the industrial age. Now, Madam Chair, a 2% increase in temperatures, if it happens, let's put it practically into context. That would result in a sea level rise of between 0.6 of a meter and 1 meter. What does that mean? That means the whole of Browns Beach, the beach I think that was recently voted one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, would disappear. That means, Madam Chair, that the QEH will be in water. That means that most of our hotel plants in Barbados and the whole West Coast will be underwater. That means Bridgetown would be underwater. And when I say a 2-degree rise, Madam Chair, I mean a 2-degree rise in temperature, in atmospheric temperature. Now, why are we getting to this point? Over the last 18 months, rather than slowing down, we've actually been increasing greenhouse gases. If we continue at this rate, the 2-degree rise that we expected to happen in and around 2050 is going to happen by 2030. So I'm trying to explain to people everywhere I go that it is actually indeed a desperate situation. If even we take the guidance from the weather patterns, once upon a time, Madam Chair, the hurricanes always came off the African coast, and we spent 6 months of the year watching the satellite imagery, and we're watching for how the weather patterns move, and we're looking to see if it's coming to Barbados, if it's below Barbados, if it's above Barbados, because it always turns right. It goes to the island chain, moves at the island chain, and swings right just before the United States. Last hurricane season, a hurricane came off the African coast and turned right and went straight for Ireland. They never contemplated it would head in the direction of the United Kingdom. But the weather patterns are actually so unstable now that no one knows what to expect. And if that is now, imagine 5 years from now. or imagine 10 years from now, what does 2030 look like for us? Every single light, the fluorescent lights we have there, every single light would be LED or something less energy consuming than that. All of our generation from electricity would be by renewable sources. There'll be no burning of coal, no burning of heavy fuel oils, nothing. In Barbados, we'll likely be generating electricity entirely from solar, from wind, or from wave technology, which is the developing technology. While solar is a good fit for Barbados, and we tend to have sunshine year-round, the fact is we are a land-scarce country, and solar technology is land-greedy. So the amount of space that you require to take up to generate a megawatt of electricity using a wind turbine, you probably need 10, 15, 20 times the fall space of the same turbine to generate the same amount of electricity, if that puts it in context for you. So for Barbados to sustain ourselves, if we had to go solely, if our energy mix consisted solely of solar panels, Madam Chair, you'd be to see us from space, we look like one big mirror. We simply don't have the space to put down the amount of solar panels needed to power Barbados. Our consumption now at peak capacity, I believe, is 150-something megawatts. If we do go to full electrification of Barbados, then we're looking at a peak capacity of around about 600 to 700 megawatts, because don't forget, all of the buses, all of the cars, everything that now runs on gas is going to run on electricity. So you're not going to have to generate that much more electricity, but we can't afford to generate that much more electricity by burning fossil fuels, because then we're just accelerating the problem. So we're looking at the switch out and energy efficiency. So a number of programs in our ministry, a number of the projects in our ministry concentrate not just on the generation of electricity from renewable sources, but also looking at doing energy efficiency audits in the ministries. We look at how can you retrofit a building and use half of the amount of electricity, right, to generate effectively twice as much power. We're looking at how can we reduce the electricity bill for the Water Authority by using solar PV or using wind turbines or biomass. Biomass is also in our mix. So we're looking at every single source of energy for generation that can work in a small country that is renewable, that we can go to again and again and again. So we produce more electricity at a significantly lesser cost. I like to use this example, Madam Chair. When we were children, we used to watch the Jetsons. The Prime Minister used to talk about the Jetsons, so I'll talk about the Jetsons. You saw floating cars, and you said that would never happen. You saw people talking into their phone. You said that would never happen. Somebody watching something in their hand, like a television, and you said that would never happen. Madam Chair, I just came through Miami. Nobody walks in Miami City anymore. They're the same scooters we built as little children that had a long handle, and you had two little wheels, one in front, one in back, and you sit down and you push yourself by one foot. Those scooters are now being handled by Uber, by Lyft. The transportation companies have these scooters. You go and you touch your cell phone to it, or you touch your credit card to the front of it, and you get on, you ride it till you get where you're going, and then you leave it right there and proceed. And the next person who wants it picks it up from there, right? Electric skateboards, Madam Chair, electric bicycles. The face of the electric mobility has changed, and we keep saying like down the road, down the road, down the road. It's not down the road. It is actually now. So we now need to put ourselves ahead of that curve. Our reality is that within 5 years, all of the advertisements that you see for vehicles on TV, on cable, we Barbadians, we like to follow. We like to do what the big countries are doing. So we want that SUV that we saw in the Super Bowl halftime advertisement, right? But in 5 years, all of those are going to be electric. We have started, the Ministry of Transport has procured 30 electric buses. Our ministry is also procuring 2 electric buses to use as a pilot to test the effect of the electric buses on the grids. But we're going that direction. Barbados itself, last year, had the 3rd highest penetration per capita of electric vehicles in the world. That's a major feat. It's 300 vehicles, but Jamaica has 6 electric vehicles. We have charging ports everywhere. In the States, charging ports are a big issue. They don't have sufficient charging ports. But we're ahead of the curve. All we need to do is to make them a little bit more affordable, Madam Chair, and we'll get to where we're going. But I just hope that that created a picture of what 2030 Barbados looks like and what we actually need to do to get where we want to get.
Honorable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Minister, I want to begin by publicly thanking you because on 3 separate occasions during the course of the last financial year, you would have personally and physically made yourself available to join me in my constituency and to come to the rescue of my constituents who, through no fault of their own, have been confronted with some severe challenges in terms of access to water in areas like Redmond Village and Qulan, Welches, Arch Hall, Seaview. And may I also say that, across the upper elevations of St. Thomas, because even though Melrose is not part of my constituency, they are right next door and part of the challenges over there. I think, Minister, it would be a useful thing if you could use this opportunity to speak to this Parliament and by extension to the country as to some of the causative factors behind the challenges that continue to replicate themselves, and more expansively on what are the solutions which are being implemented by your ministry and its technical officials.
Honorable Member, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, but I'll take the opportunity to call somebody else. I'd like to call Dr. John Mazza.
Good afternoon. Essentially, the water supply issues that have been raised are a result of 2 significant components. One is the aging infrastructure, and 2 is the available water resources. For example, if you look at the Shop Hill system and the system that supplies Castle Grant, which supplies the upper areas of St. Thomas, St. Joseph, St. John, and St. Andrew. Those systems, the majority of the water mains in there would be small diameter mains, 3-inch diameter, which are no longer produced. The other diameters would be old-sized mains, like 7-inch. If you go from Rock Hall, St. Andrew, stay on top of that ridge, past Epps Hill, right into St. Thomas, Rock Hall in St. Thomas. We have a 7-inch main that runs on that ridge, which again tells you how old the main is because they no longer produce 7-inch mains. Now, those areas, the water that is supplied to those areas is essentially pumped from the lower elevations. So we would be pumping water from the coastline, where our water wells are, Molineux, Trents, Carlton, Ashton Hall, Allendale, which are all lifting water inland. And because you are lifting water from the lower elevations, that water floats on top of seawater. So anytime you have a reduction in rainfall, the water that floats on the seawater is thinner, and you start pumping seawater. So when you have drought situations like we have had the last couple of years, when you overpump those wells, the water will become salty. And the only way you could address them is to reduce the amount of water that you are pumping or stop pumping altogether. Now, recently, we upgraded the desalination plant that is operated by Ionics at Spring Garden by 50%. And in addition to that, we constructed a new pumping station next to St. James Secondary School, and also replaced and installed a new main from to St. Stephen's Reservoir. What that has done is that we are now able to push some of that additional supply from Ionics to Trents, and from Trents that is pumped across Highway 2A to Lancaster, and from Lancaster is pumped to Epsil, where we have another pumping station, and that then pumps the water into the Castle Grande system to feed the high elevations. So with that, we would have seen some relief in the amount of water outages because we are pushing an additional 5 million gallons a day. For the Shop Hill system, which is along Highway 2A, the same water that we are pumping from Trents, some of that is being diverted along Highway 2A to feed the Shop Hill system, which extends right up to Flat Rock in St. George. And that has provided some relief to those residents. Unfortunately, that system alone cannot meet the demand. So the additional supplies actually come from Upperwoods, Bomaston, and Sweetville. Now, the wells that are on the coastline, the major issue that we have with them is salt water increasing in the fresh water. For the Upperwoods, Sweetville, Bomaston, and Sweetville, Upperwoods, and Bomaston, those areas, they don't have salt water underneath them. What we experience is a reduction in water level. And so when the water level drops, we also get a reduction in the amount of water that we can pump. For example, recently, as late as in November last year, we went into the cave at Bomaston. I'm not a tall man, by any means. When we go into Bomaston Cave, I cannot walk in the section where we have dammed the water. The water will be above my head. The first time we went in there, the water was up to my waistline. And my waistline is probably about 3 feet. That's how low the water level had dropped. We went back there 2 weeks later. There was a change in water level because we had some rainfall that fell that weekend. But that would not last because that was like a flash flood. Normally you are depending on the whole catchment contributing. And during the rainy season, what we should be seeing on average in that cave is up to about 19 feet of water. And that November was the end of the rainy season. So we should be seeing the most contribution from the rainy season. And that was where the first time we went in, it was only about 3 feet deep. So the impact of the reduction in rainfall due to drought has been very heavy, and unfortunately, we expect that impact to continue into the next rainy season. And unless we get a reprieve in the rainy season, we could expect that the impacts of the drought will continue.
Chair, I want to thank Dr. Mwansa for his elucidation of the problem. I go back to my constituency because while Dr. Mwansa, it is obviously a good thing that you can now pump an additional 5 million gallons a day. I am sensing in parts of Redmond Village and Q-Land, for example, that there's still a frequency of outages. And my question then to you is, to help the ordinary man understand the challenge, is it then likely that you are pumping 5 million gallons a day into old mains and that there's a consequential likelihood that ongoing outages are related to the quality of the mains? And if so, if that is correct, could you then elaborate a little bit on the question of your mains replacement and in fact, not only the replacement and maintenance of mains, but I would imagine also the question of the maintenance and the condition of your reservoirs?
Over the years, the BW has been substantially constrained by access to funding for its works. The existing network, as the Minister explained before, is an aged infrastructure which needs replacing. Now, it cannot be done in one sweep. Recognizing the difficulties that we've been experiencing in the higher elevations of the island, we actually solicited funding from the CDB, and we have had a targeted mains replacement program, which has started from the Bomaston area, which is the area where we're trying to get that water into Gordon Ridge system to pump to Castle Grande. So if you have been on the road, you'd have probably seen the mains that we have replaced in St. John, and we're currently working on the main there from Colleton to Messiah Street. We just replaced the main in Welshtown. We have replaced the main from St. John Primary School right down to Port House. And so we have a targeted mains replacement program which will allow us, with that additional supply that we're putting in system, to retain it and not lose it as part of the leakage. Additionally, we have a loan program that we are currently almost ready to sign with the European Investment Bank. The mains program for that is actually targeted in the area between Gordon Ridge and Castle Grande Reservoir, because we realized when we are able to pump consistently from the trains, Epps Hill, Lancaster system into Castle Grande, the minute we start seeing recovery in the Castle Grande Reservoir, we actually experience burst mains in that area, and the supply will drop. So we know that we could, with the amount that we are producing now, we could do better in terms of consistency in supply if we also are able to stabilize the bursts that are occurring in the area supplied by the water that we are talking about.
My final question, again, is the authority now ascertain exactly where when the first main takes place, or is it still the situation where you have to wait to see the moisture come to the surface, and then it can be purchased? And is there any technology which does exist in your knowledge that can assist you in identifying the rupture in the main and therefore taking early measures that will correct that?
There are various ways you could get an indication of a burst main. At the pumping station, we have pressure gauges that we are supposed to maintain a particular pressure. And so when we see a drop in pressure, it could be an indication of a burst main. Additionally, we have situations where we are entirely dependent on the customers telling us when they see a burst main with water running on the surface. We will be made aware and will know that we have a burst main. but there are some bursts that will never come up to the surface because the coral rock is such that the water will go into the coral rock rather than rise up to the surface. Now, to address those bursts, we have technology. In fact, we have up-to-date technology, the latest available on the market. But because of the fact that we don't have that technology installed permanently across the island, what we actually end up doing is that when a problem is reported, we will deploy that equipment in that area. And there's a piece of equipment called a data logger, which we will put on fixtures that are attached to the water mains. And when we drive through those areas, we'll get an indication as to which of those loggers are identifying a leak in the system. And with that, we are in a position to isolate the area where that burst main might be. And then there are two ways to finally pinpoint the location of the main. We have an equipment that is called a noise correlator, where again you go and put two loggers on either side of where you suspect the leak to be. And they will calculate where from each logger, the distance from each logger, where the leak is. So you are in a position to go there and dig at that location. The other alternative is that we have workmen who move along the path of the water main with headphones. And they'll be sounding along the pipe and listening for noise until they hear the gushing noise from the pipe. That way, again, you would have pinpointed the location of the burst main. So we are, at this point, still dependent a lot on the customer telling us they've experienced water outage. But when we do find out from the customer, and if it's not coming up to the surface, we have equipment to locate where the leak might be.
Just one thing, Madam Chair, just by way of further explanation, the exact same piece of equipment that they use to sound along the length of the pipe is the same piece of equipment that, for example, if you have an extra high water bill and you suspect that you have a leak underground in your premises, that we would, our non-revenue department would come and sound along your premises to try to find the leak that you may not even know exists.
Honorable member for St. James North.
Thank you, Chairperson. Minister, Honorable Minister, I wish to commend you first in terms of the leadership that you have brought to your ministry. You had to hit the ground running because one of the mission criticals fell squarely in your ministry, the storage that would have been running. In fact, on the location at which we are sited at present, right here. 2 years ago, and within a very short space of time, I think 6 weeks or so, you and your team, of course, because you couldn't do it alone, was able to resolve a problem that the previous government for 2.5 years was unable to resolve. And you have done your country, you and your team, a national service in that regard. But want to address the issue of the Water Authority, which is sub-program, I think, 542 under your head. And of course, the Water Authority under your ministry was one of the corporations that really and truly was raped literally and figuratively by the last government. Legal fees, horrendous legal fees, $1.4 million charged to by a friend of the Prime Minister, for instance, and legal partner for reading
On a
three...
point of order, ma'am, I hate to interrupt my honorable friend, but I think he wants to say a friend of the former Prime Minister.
Okay. My greatest apologies, of course. Friend of the former Prime Minister, friend and legal partner for reading 3 documents and going to 2 meetings. And of course, in terms of construction projects, well documented, some of which the minister, the then minister, former minister of Water Resources and Agriculture, as the ministry was then styled, would have been personally involved in as well as a director. And therefore, you have had to, at least this department has had to, I believe, cope with a debt of about $70 million at one time, a debt that has been restructured to some extent. And I would first want to ask Minister, in terms of if you can, to give you an opportunity here in this Parliament to report to this Parliament and to the country and the wider world the progress made in restructuring the debt of the Water Authority, and especially in relation to the companies that had been granted very favorable contractual terms.
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask the Chairman of the Barbados Water Authority, Mrs. Leodine Worrell, to deal with that one, because she was the person at the forefront of those negotiations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Barbados Water Authority was indeed faced with a number of onerous contracts. We've just concluded negotiations in relation to some. The review of 20 contracts only indicated that the Barbados Water Authority would have actually been obligated to a $1.5 billion debt, which would have increased our expenditure.
What was that number again?
$1.5 billion out of 20 contracts. And it would have increased our monthly, it would have increased our expenditure to roughly an additional $93 million a year. Most of these contracts did not go out to tender. Indeed, most of these contracts were in fact unknown to even the senior management within the Water Authority. The contracts were either signed by the then chairman and the members of the board. They were contracts that were either given by directives, but whether ministerial or from a chairman's perspective. In our investigations, we also found out that the members of the board actually, with regard to the building itself, basically signed a resolution that gave their voting power to the then executive chairman, Dr. Atlee Braffett, and therefore, even to a large extent, not that it in any way alleviates the fiduciary and other obligations of the directors, but a lot of decisions, therefore, did not even reach the stage of management's understanding. Along with Mr. I can say we have to negotiate? Yeah, Mr. David Nagoski of White Oak, and my critical team, which is made up of the General Manager, Keith Roy Halliday, Dr. John Mwanza, Charles Leslie, and Elvin Jordan. we basically worked together to reduce the expenditure and the exposure to the Barbados Water Authority by roughly 63 or 65%.
Just 1 second, Minister. Just because knowing you as well as they do, I'm going to answer your next question. Our negotiated settlement and the resolution of those contracts are without prejudice to the right to take legal action if warranted due to illegality or other measures or other circumstances. So the Barbados Water Authority has settled some of the most egregious of the contracts, but reserves its rights to under the law.
Okay. Madam Chair, thank you. What has just been disclosed to this Parliament shows why the Cabinet of Barbados and the Attorney General, Honorable Attorney General specifically, has directed that an investigation be carried out forensically on the operations of the Barbados Water Authority during the 10 lost years of the last administration, because the current expenditure for which this Parliament is being asked to vote for the next financial year, $2.22 billion. The total revenue just over $3 billion, and we're hearing that one statutory authority was allowed to incur debt of $1.5 billion, $1.66 billion to be exact. This, of course, impacted, Minister, on the program of water storage devices, water tanks at private homes, businesses, etc. I know that you and your management team would have promised incentives for as many households as possible in Barbados to install water tanks, especially in an era where you're under pressure, we are under pressure in terms of rainfall capacity and water outages in Barbados. And where can you give this Parliament a present status position on this, the ability of the authority to give incentives so people can install their own water tanks for when you have the water outages? And also, Minister, with that also a report on what was the position of the previous government in terms of the arrangements they had made with any contractor on installing water tanks, and at what cost that was to the authority.
Before I turn the details over to Ms. Worrell, allow me to just say this. As I said at the beginning, 2030 is going to look a lot different to all of us. The way we do things now are not going to be the way we do things going forward. We've had a couple years of drought, with this year being the worst one in the last 60 years. The rainfall patterns are predicted to be more erratic than they have been. And so we're looking at a situation where, in the same way that the Water Authority needs to become independent of the power generation utility, Barbadians need as well to do what it is that they have to do in order to secure the water for themselves. So if the water from the main goes off and you have no tank, you feel it immediately for as long as that disruption lasts. If you have a tank, then you may not even feel it at all. So where we're getting to a situation where the water system globally is becoming a little bit more unreliable because of rainfall patterns, the fact is it's incumbent upon all of us to do what it is that we have to do to protect our own supply and to minimize the disruption to ourselves when those disruptions do occur. So I just wanted to put that framework there because we have to get to a point where everybody has a tank. We have to get to a point where people store rainwater, but also have potable water tanks to allow that buffer in the event that there's a disruption in the water supply. So I just want to put that context before directing the particulars of it to Ms. Worrell.
Yes, Madam Chair. As Dr. Moanza would have indicated, for years, and I mean years, the Barbados Water Authority has not been the recipient of any funding. As I would have indicated previously, as a matter of fact, whatever funds we had were actually depleted. And as such, we find ourselves in a very precarious position as it relates to our ability financially to move forward on a number of ideas and a number of plans that we have. With regard to the personal tank program raised by Minister Hinkson, the Barbados Water Authority has been for the last couple of weeks actually been in negotiations with the Ministry of Finance, in particular with the DFE, Dr. Ambassador Clyde Maskell, as well as Dr. Kevin Greenidge and David Nagoski of White Oaks, seeing how we can best set up to address what we have identified as being the 10 major issues facing the country and that needs to be addressed, of which the tank supply program is one. The negotiations have been quite fruitful thus far, and at this point in time, I'm not in a position really to give further details as they are unfolding every day as we speak. As recent as today, Dr. Maskell came and spent some time with the Finance Department at the Barbados Water Authority to best see how we can set it up, because the program that existed before certainly did not meet the standard or the test of reasonableness as anyone may define it to be.
What I will say, Honourable Member, is that the ultimate details of it are still being worked on, but what is envisioned is the Water Authority having a pre-approved set of contractors, not one or two, but having a list of pre-approved contractors, set prices for the installation of the proper installation of the tanks and pumps, because if they install badly, then it can cause a stagnation in the tank or other issues that complicate things even further. But the proper installation of the tanks and the pumps, and the customer be able, where necessary, to net it off, to pay it off over a period of time on the bill. So if you can't afford, let's say the cost is $1,000. That's not what it's going to be, but let's say, just for ease of creating a figure, let's say the cost is $1,000, and you can't afford to pay $1,000 up front. The Barbados Water Authority, through its program, will be able to provide the tank for you, and you may pay that $1,000 back over payments of $50 a month for 20 months. So that is the envisioned framework to make it as accessible and as easy as possible with the lowest possible interest and cost of installation, so that it is not out of the reach of everyone. Of course, especially where you have situations of the most vulnerable people, then the Water Authority will be prepared to make certain concessions to make sure that they're protected as well. So we accept that being without water is a most disruptive thing. You can be without energy, you can be without clothes, you can be without many things, TV. You can't survive long without water. So part of our mandate is to ensure that everybody has access to potable water. So where we have to create special programs or make special concessions where the circumstances of the individuals so warrant, and the Water Authority is going to be prepared to do it. We're looking to roll out our plan as quickly as possible, and the details will be forthcoming once we have settled them. But it is going to be done in the shortest possible time, and it is going to be a simple process. No lot of red tape, no lot of long talk. Once you require a tank and we have the tanks available, then we're going to install the tank for you and work out the terms. All right, work out the terms and install the tank for you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairperson. My final question is more related to the community level burst water pipes. And, you know, when the previous government, the last government, increased water rates in 2009 by 60%. I think that most of the general population, took it at heart because we were told by that government that this money would be used to replace the archaic 100-year-old, 100-plus-year-old pipe system in Barbados, which was mentioned earlier on in the debate. That was not done, and therefore, Honorable Minister, you preside over a major challenge. Burst pipes, I could speak for myself. Hardly a week passes that a constituent doesn't call me, or I myself, when I'm driving in my constituency, see a burst pipe and immediately call, or WhatsApp one of your senior management at the authority. And I must say, whenever I make that intervention, there is a response. Although my constituents invariably say that for 2-3 weeks they call or report and there's no response. And the fact, though, Minister, is that you might repair the burst pipe here and then next week you get a burst pipe 50 meters down the road. That's the reality, I suppose, of having 100-year-plus pipes. And I know Dr. Wanza spoke a bit in terms of the challenge, but I'm just wondering what strategic plan your ministry has in terms of replacing these burst pipes over the period of time, knowing full well, Minister, that this is millions and millions and millions of dollars that we're talking about.
I think I remember hearing the answer to that question when the honorable member for St. James Central would have asked it.
The financing, the financing
you want to know about
capacity,
financing?
Right, that's what I meant. I think he spoke more in terms of the
From
infrastructure.
the point of view of finance.
But
Honorable Member, the Cabinet had decided, and the government has a stated policy, that in the renewable energy space is going to be a carve-out for the Barbados Water Authority of between 15 and 25%. So what is intended in that space is that the Water Authority will have a guaranteed reserved space in the renewable energy industry that it can enter or use of its own accord to generate income, or in partnership with somebody else as an investment opportunity. And the funds from that carve-out are intended to be used in the mains replacement progress, to have a continuous mains replacement process. The reality is that we have, in Barbados, we have 2,500 kilometers of water mains. The estimated cost of replacing a kilometer of water main, that is trenching, taking it up, replacing it, reinstating, is $1 million. So if we were to replace all of the water mains in Barbados, we'd be looking at $2.5 billion. So this is not something that the Water Authority is in a position to do, and I guess that's why it has not been done yet. But once we get the intended program up and running and get into that space, then you will have a steady return from the utility who is purchasing, because they operate on a buy all, sell all. So when you generate electricity, they buy it all and then they sell it back to you, or they sell it, push it to the grid. So most people get a check at the end of the month, and we're depending on that check at the end of every month to actually keep our mains replacement program going. So that is the current contingency in relation to that. We believe it's going to work because, as I said, the returns right now in the renewable energy space are quite generous. So that is the position to do the mains replacement program. We have a number of other loans or grants that are as well in train, that are dealing with specific areas of replacement. So there's mains replacement going on now, but those are for specific projects. We can't keep approaching it piecemeal because it is too widespread to tackle it that way. So we have to be able to have a continuous, ongoing mains replacement program and that is how we expect to fund it.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, to you and your team. When the opposition leader spoke, well, if he had spoken, when he was speaking, he said if he had spoken, he would have asked you about the cost of water. And I think that was in relation to what people see on the bills. So perhaps if you could explain that. And he said he would also have asked you about the South Coast. So if you could give an update on that and our general overall plans for sewage entirely. And then I have my own questions.
Oh, so you're asking for the Honourable Member of the Opposition?
Well, I believe they're important questions, and the Minister was about to respond. I did not want to deny him the opportunity,
But
nor
one
would
would
I wish to
consider
have
them
it
to
left
be
as
your
an unanswered question.
So you want 6 questions? Go ahead, Honourable Member.
I'm going to ask Charles Leslie to take this one. Really costly water. The costly water nearly.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon.
In response to the question, basically, the cost of water is we had increase in the rate of the tariffs, but basically a proportion of that money is going directly towards the sewage, and a proportion is going to the garbage. The proportion that comes to the sewage basically is going to be used for the upgrade and the maintenance of our sewer systems. Over the last couple of months, we've been doing a number of upgrades to our sewage treatment plant. At the South Coast, for instance, we would have replaced the screens. At the Bridgetown sewage plant, we would have also replaced screens. We've been making upgrades in terms of the replacement of blowers. We would have done upgrades to our treatment processes. So the monies that are coming from that garbage and sewage revenue is basically used to upgrade our treatment plants and to maintain our wastewater systems. We would have done some repairs to the networks on the South Coast, especially. We would have done cleaning of our Bridgetown network, and it is a continuous process. Our wastewater treatment systems and the networks have been neglected over the years because of the lack of funding. And the monies that we are currently collecting from that garbage and sewage allowance is basically being used to bring those two plants and the network, as well as the networks, up to a reasonable standard. So, thank you.
Madam Chair, just one other thing. I think directly relating to the honourable member's question. Right now, Barbados has among the cheapest water in the world. I think we are in the top 3, definitely top 5 cheapest waters in the world. The only country in the Caribbean that has cheaper water than Barbados is actually Trinidad. And that's because their generation, as I said, one of the greatest input costs in the water supply is electricity. And Trinidad heavily subsidizes the electricity aspect of their water generation. So although Barbadians complain about their water bills, the fact is it's all relative. It might be high for what we are accustomed paying, but if you look at it globally, then it is pretty much nothing. If, to use an example, Madam Chair, the bottle of water that you purchase in the the bottle of drinking water everybody likes to have, the normal 16-ounce bottle of water might cost you $3 to purchase. For us to generate that same amount of water, it wouldn't even cost 1 cent. That's just to put it in context. So Barbadians have gotten into the habit. We use water like if there is no cost. A year ago, I asked a hotelier on the South Coast, why don't you upgrade your plant to include water-saving devices? And he said, because it will cost me way more to install the water-saving devices than it will cost me to keep paying the water at the rates that they're at for the next 5 or 10 years. So while we complain about the cost of water, the actual cost of water relative to the rest of the world, I'm not just talking the Caribbean, the rest of the world is exceedingly cheap. Our bills are not a true representation of the cost of the water that is actually going through the pipe and the quality of the water. I just want to make that point very, very clearly. Madam Chair, I'm going to ask for Dr. Seeley to speak, to address more on the upgrade of the plants and the plans, the long-term plans for sewage and reuse of water. Dr. Hugh Seeley.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. This administration's policy is to reuse every drop that we can. So the policy will be to upgrade the Bridgetown plant and the South Coast plants to tertiary treatment. Then we have to do
What is tertiary treatment?
tertiary treatment being that, well, we have the technology now, ministers, honorable members, to take sewage to drinking water standard. It is, the question is more what is culturally and socially acceptable rather than what is technologically possible at this stage. So we do have that technology and we can take it to that level. What is required now is the economic analysis to determine what is the best rate of return on that reclaimed water. There are several options. As I said, we could go direct toilet to tap if that was culturally acceptable. Direct reuse is what we call that. We could recharge aquifers, potable water aquifers, for example, the St. Michael aquifer with the Bell, the St. Philip aquifer with the Hampton well, with the objective of retrieving that exact water molecule for potable water use. And if we went to that stage, we would be producing water of drinking water quality, putting it back into the ground, and then abstracting it for drinking purposes. We could also irrigate crops, and we could break down that into two types of crops to make it more simple. Crops that are eaten without processing, tomatoes, lettuce, and crops that are not edible, crops that are like cotton, that you will not be eaten. So the analysis has to be done, but right now we're producing about 4 million gallons a day of wastewater, and that's being discharged to the sea. I'm adding Bridgetown and South Coast. And that could go a long way to meeting the water deficit that we have in a drought year. We think that we have a water deficit of around 7 million gallons a day. If I could add to one thing that Minister Abrams said about the value of water, the fact that when we buy bottled water, we're paying 1,000 times more for that water than when we take it out of the tap. But it gets worse than that, Madam Chair, because then when we use it in the tap, we waste 90% of it down the drain or down the toilet. And it's that 90% of the water that we want to go after and see if we can reclaim. I hope that answers the question.
While I appreciate and I understand because of where I'm sitting here, that water is relatively cheap compared to other territories, I also represent a constituency that does not have a sewer system. And almost on a daily basis, I am asked why we are being asked to contribute to the sewage system when we are expected to build our own wells, to dig our own wells with little or no assistance from the government. What can they use, what can they say to comfort the people that do not contribute this? Considering some of these are farmers, and they're having water bills because of the garbage. We're happy with the garbage, get me wrong, but because of this extra added addition to the bill, we are having farmers with bills $10,000 that used to be probably $6,000. What can I say to them to comfort them? Is this something that in the long run we will see dissipate, lessen, taken off the people that don't use the system? I'm asking.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. I remember 25 years, 30 years ago when we were addressing both Bridgetown and the South Coast, and the question was whether the residents, let's deal with the South Coast, whether the residents of the South Coast should pay for the South Coast system alone. And the decision then and the decision now, and I think it is a fair one, is that we're trying to protect a national asset. In the case of the coastal sewage projects, we're trying to protect our reefs. And our reefs are national assets. And therefore, I think it is fair and equitable that all Barbadians pay to protect those assets, not only those who are connected to the sewer system, because it's a national benefit.
Understood.
Madam Chair, further on that one, there's this misconception that the GSC is an increase in the cost of water in Barbados. That's a levy that the Barbados Water Authority collects for the government of Barbados. So out of the GSC monies, I think the Barbados Water Authority gets less than 17% of what is collected. The bulk of that money actually goes towards funding the Sanitation Sewage Authority. So the people who complain that Sanitation Service Authority, I got sewage in my mind. The people who complain that I don't have a sewage system, so I shouldn't have to pay that tax. Let's say we actually did go that way, all that would come off is 17%, right? You still have to pay the rest for your garbage collection. That is what the honorable member is using to purchase his garbage trucks. That's what the Sanitation Service Authority is using to pay the people who load and offload. That is how they're managing their office expenses and the dump. So I just want to disavow people of this misheld conception that somehow represents more money to the Barbados Water Authority towards the cost of water. The Barbados Water Authority is only a collection agent. It could equally have been somewhere else. I mean, had everybody had a telephone, a fixed line, you could probably have asked the telephone company, Flow, to collect it for us. But it falls to the Water Authority to collect it. But of that, we take less than 17%. I just want to make that very, very clear. So, and it is only for sewage. So the money that is collected by the Barbados Water Authority through the GSC cannot be used to pay our bills, pay our staff, pay anything. That is used to do the flushing of the sewer network. That is used to do any fixes at the plant. The upgrades of the plant that we're doing now have all been done through that GSC. And just so people understand the application of it, everybody remembers what happened when the sewage was coming up all the time, caused by massive blockages in the pipes. We flushed our entire sewer network, the entire Bridgetown sewer network, the entire South Coast sewer network. People would have seen last year these trucks out, these massive vacuum trucks out, flushing every single night. What people don't understand is that that flushing continues every single day now. So we constantly are on a rotation, especially flushing Bridgetown, which is proving to be a problem spot with the grease. So that is where that money is going. I hope that explains it a little bit better for people. It's not that we charge you more for water. It's just that we happen to collect it for the government.
Thank you. Honourable Member, continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your kindness. Just two questions which are asked very closely together. Minister, you would have, you'd have gone, and I've heard you before speak to this water zoning policy. I think you said you were replacing a 1964 policy. Could you please tell us a bit about that water zoning policy, what it's meant to achieve, what it seeks to remedy, and how it will benefit Barbadians? And then my last question is in relation to renewable energy, Madam Chair. And I know 2030 is soon upon us, And our aspirations are to be fossil fuel free by 2030 or carbon neutral. I would just like to hear the specific plans that we have in place to guarantee that we are able to meet these aspirations that we set for ourselves as a country. Thanks.
With respect to the water zoning policy, I'm going to ask, although I think I can answer that, I'm sure that Dr. Seeley can answer that a lot better than I could, so I'm going to ask Dr. Seeley to do that one.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. The 1962 water protection policy is no longer fit for purpose. The primary objective of that water policy was to protect the public supply wells from contamination from above ground sources, primarily housing. And as we all know, we restricted development in Zone 1 areas, less restriction in Zone 2, coming down to the least restrictive Zone 5, which were primarily coastal areas. As a result of that policy, we allowed agriculture in the Zone 1 areas, relatively unrestricted agriculture in those Zone 1 areas. And as a result of that, we have nitrates in our groundwater relatively ubiquitously, in other words, all over the place. Now, I'm not saying that our groundwater is not safe to drink. Please, let me clarify. The levels are below WHO guidelines, but they are persistent and they are there. And the water that's in the ground flows towards the coast, and that's where the issue becomes. As I indicated earlier, our coral reefs are perhaps our greatest physical economic asset. And it's this contaminated groundwater flow into our near shore that is damaging our reefs. Therefore, the way that we wish to approach water protection and land use policy in the future is more of an integrated one, where we not only seek to protect the public supply well, but we seek to protect our coastlines as well. Now, there may be an immediate direct economic benefit from changing our water use policy and moving from the Zone 1 to 5 to new zones, Zones A to E. And I believe a paper has been circulated to this Parliament, or will be circulated to this Parliament, that outlines our recommendations. Because of increases in technology as well, we believe that we can reduce the radius or the diameter of that zone around the public supply well and still protect the public supply well. And therefore, when you look at the new zones, the net result of the new zones will be a release of about 4% of our land mass for development, moving from 9% of our area being Zone 1 to about 5% of our area being Zone 1. So it releases about 4% of our land area for development, which is a great direct economic benefit. However, it does also impose restrictions on houses that were not there before. For example, the use of a suckwell alone to dispose of your waste would no longer be acceptable. You would have to have some form of septic tank or some form of treatment. This is for all houses I'm referring to. And this is across the island, sir. And then all housing of a particular density that goes over a particular threshold may be required to put in a treatment plant as well. So in some areas, the areas is being relaxed. In some areas, it is becoming more stringent. But it is modernizing a policy that dates back to 1964 and is no longer fit for purpose.
Madam Chair, there's one other thing. As I said, but this segues into the honourable member's other question. We need to change the way we look at our land use and the way we conceive or we picture Barbados. So at present, all development is restricted in Zone 1 areas. But there's no good reason, for example, why you can't have wind turbines in a Zone 1 area that don't pollute the water system, but also allow agriculture to happen at the base of and around the wind turbines. So it's how can we best use our scarce land resources while still achieving the objectives that inform the first water zoning policy, and taking into consideration advancements in science and technological developments. So it is meant to free up space, but also do it in a way that doesn't actually impact or compromise our potable water system. Now, in relation to what are we doing in trying to get to 100% carbon neutral by 2030? We need, in order for us to achieve our goals, it can't just be simply generating more renewable energy. We also need to look at our consumption patterns. And this applies equally to water as it does to electricity. When someone flushes their toilet, they don't think to themselves that there's an electricity cost to that, because you don't have a wire running from your toilet. But when you flush your toilet, that water has to be replaced by being pumped somewhere for it to feed to your toilet. So there's an electricity cost to pumping. If we look at water-saving devices, let's, for example, use a water-saving toilet. A water-saving toilet would use about 1.5 gallons of water per flush. A normal toilet would use about 3 times that, 4.5 to 5 gallons per flush. So we can straight off see that if even we use water-saving devices, it helps to save water, but also brings down the consumption of electricity by the Barbados Water Authority, because you actually need to pump less water to satisfy the same need. We have to look at e-mobility. E-mobility is a fancy word for the electrification of our energy and transport sector. Our public transportation sector uses, I believe, I don't want to quote the wrong figures, but uses a large amount of fossil fuels. 33% of the fossil fuel consumption in Barbados goes to our public transportation sector. So for us to get to 100% renewable and fossil fuel free by 2030, we can no longer be contemplating a future where we're using diesel or gas burning vehicles. Now, I must commend my colleagues in Cabinet, because it was 2 Thursdays ago that Cabinet approved a decision, a policy, to encourage the use of electric vehicles in the government fleet. We already know that the Transport Board is looking to replace its fleet by electric vehicles. So going forward, when the Transport Board is looking to replace vehicles, is looking to do it with electric vehicles. The government has now taken a position that effective the 1st of March next year, the policy will be to purchase electric vehicles or hybrids rather than fossil fuel consuming vehicles. There's going to be exemption there for vehicles that require, where the technology does not support the use of electric vehicles. So heavy power vehicles like garbage trucks or other vehicles like that, there can be exemption for those, but only until such time as the technology catches up with it. Because once an electric vehicle will serve the purpose, then we're looking to do that going forward. So that policy and the horizon of that policy is meant to give the car dealers notice, is meant to let people see that the government is serious about leading from in front on this one. Because once Barbadians start to see more and more electric vehicles on the road, and I must thank my PS today. PS, we had a meeting to go to in lunch, and the PS insisted that we take her vehicle, the ministry's vehicle, which was an electric vehicle, as opposed to my non-electric vehicle. And we zipped up the road. I drove. I had quite a good time. But the point is, this has to become the norm. It can't be a novelty anymore. The other thing we have to do is we need not just to do energy audits in government buildings, but we also need to do energy audits in our home. Because the upfront cost of an LED bulb might be more than an incandescent bulb. But if you look at the cost savings across the life of that bulb, you save electricity. So for those who switch out and made their houses full of LED equipment, they have seen a drastic reduction in their electricity bill, and the ministry is looking this year to, in conjunction with another one, I don't want to call the partners name, another one of our partners, to have a push where we try to match people. You buy one LED bulb, we give you one free. So all of these are things that we're looking to stimulate the push towards energy efficiency and water conservation that will all help to drive the consumption of electricity down, drive the cost of electricity down, and catapult us towards our 2030 goal.
Thank you.
Chairperson, I move that you now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again.
Question is that I do now report to His Honor, the Honorable Speaker, progress, and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of the Finance Committee has reported progress and asked for leave to sit again. Honourable member.
Honourable Speaker, I move that this House be adjourned for suspended for 15 minutes until 5:40 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber stands suspended for 15 minutes. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended for 15 minutes.